Who could have imagined that one of the most grandiose private palaces in the United States of America would be born not from ancient family grandeur, but from the ambitions of a man who came into the world not in a castle at all, but in an ordinary house in German Mannheim, far from the glamour of New York salons. No one knew then that this boy, Otto Hermann Kahn, son of an undistinguished though respected banking clerk, would one day build a place that would become a symbol of the era, inspiration for literary immortality, and at the same time, a mystery hidden in the hills of Long Island. It seemed impossible that a man who had to fight for his own place in society in his youth would erect a house capable of competing with European palaces. But the question we are posing right now, why did Kahn need to create not just a residence, but a fortress of grandeur on an artificial hill? What was he trying to prove to the world, or perhaps to himself? At the beginning of the 20th century, Long Island was flourishing as a haven for new millionaires, people who sought to rewrite their own destinies by erecting palaces where their names could sound just as confidently as the surnames of ancient aristocracy. However, Otto Kahn's story does not fit into the usual image of new money that appears suddenly and strives only for external glamour. In Kahn there was something else, a combination of refinement, almost European meticulousness to details, and the iron will of a man who saw the world in numbers, schemes, and strategies. When in 1914 the first workers began to raise the huge man-made hill that would become the foundation of the future Oheka castle, few understood the scale of the plan. Before them lay only earth that needed to be raised higher than nature itself. But for Kahn, this was only the beginning. He wanted his house to rise not just physically, but symbolically, so that no gaze turned from the surrounding valleys could pass by what he was creating. And yet, even at the moment of the birth of this colossus, a faint shade of tragedy was already felt. The house, destined to outlive both its first owners and the era, and the very idea of private luxury, was already then something more than just a residence. The initial contrast here is striking. A man who once started as a modest banking clerk now intended to build the second largest private home in the entire country. And although the walls were still only rising, the viewer of today can feel how something predestined is woven into this story. Kahn's rise, his influence, his dream of beauty and power, all this leads us to a question that still remains open. What hides behind the facade of Long Island's most ambitious private estate? The path into this mystery is only just beginning. To understand why Otto Hermann Kahn even saw the possibility of building not a house, but an entire world, we need to return to his origins, to those roots that both limited him and shaped his unique worldview. He was born in 1867 in Mannheim, in a Jewish family that valued education, work, and discipline. His father, a banker by profession, did not possess titles or land holdings, but possessed what was valued no less in Germany at that time, the reputation of an honest man with a precise mind. In childhood, the future creator of Oheka Castle studied at a Realschule, then served his mandatory military service, and afterward entered the banking sector, where he quickly began to notice what others did not see: hidden structures, flows of capital, weak points, and opportunities. Each of his advancements was not a matter of luck, but a matter of calculation. At the end of the 19th century, he moved to London, where he worked at the Speyer & Co. banking house, and later, in the early 90s, relocated to the United States of America, joining the influential Kuhn, Loeb & Co. Here, in New York, he encountered a world where old money, families like the Vanderbilts, controlled social structures. Kahn, despite his wealth and brilliant mind, remained an outsider. And here emerges the first significant hook. His worldview was formed not only from the pursuit of success, but also from quiet resistance to the barriers that did not accept him. This internal conflict, a man of enormous abilities but with limited social access, became the foundation of his strategy. He did not try to break into places where he was not expected. He created his own spaces, his own stages, where he himself set the rules. It is no wonder that contemporaries noted, Khan always acted through the creation of systems rather than trying to fit into others. This was evident in his patronage activities and in his interest in music, art, architecture. He was not just a financier, but a man of deep aesthetic taste, although this does not make him an ideal hero. In him coexisted both the desire for beauty and the desire for control. Khan worked in an era of rapid changes. World War I, the rapid growth of American cities, the rise of young magnates, all this made the social arena especially tense. He saw this world as a chessboard, where some players cling to the past, while others rise swiftly and crudely. And amid these forces, he created his own response. Not to build a factory or a chain of bank offices, but to create something as material as it was symbolic, a house that would serve as a tangible form of his convictions. By this time in his life, the first fundamental strategy had already formed. When the system closes doors, he builds his own house with its own entrance. And this entrance, as the further story will show, would become one of the most discussed architectural symbols of the 20th century. In this lies an unexpected turn that will determine the further course of events. The construction of Oheka Castle was not just ambition, but a philosophical gesture, an expression of a worldview formed from struggle, calculation, and the pursuit of beauty. By the time Otto Kahn firmly decided to build his own residence on Long Island, he already knew it would not be just a house. It would be a space where architecture becomes a language, and every line an expression of position. By the beginning of the 20th century, he had become a figure so influential that his name was spoken in the same breath with the country's largest financiers. But influence is one side of the coin. The other, the feeling that he remains different, even among those who envied him. It was precisely this duality that pushed him toward the idea of creating something so perfect that it would become an argument in itself. The choice of location was strategic. Long Island was experiencing its golden age, becoming a place where new American elites built mansions on the scale of European palaces. But Kahn did not want to be just another rich man copying the old world. He aspired to architecture that both appeals to history and transcends it. His taste leaned toward the Italian Renaissance, toward pure forms, symmetry, structures where every detail is subordinate to the overall geometry of power. And yet even this style in his hands ceased to be merely a tribute to aesthetics. It transformed into an idea of order. As soon as he acquired the vast plot in Cold Spring Harbor, work began that would astonish any engineer. The hill on which Oheka Castle stands today is not a gift of nature. It is a gigantic man-made mound created by the hands of thousands of workers who, for weeks and months, moved earth to elevate the future house above everything surrounding it. Kahn did not just build a house on top, he was building a foundation for fundamentality. He literally lifted the earth to create a point from which the house would look down on the valley from above. Engineers recalled that there was no end in sight to the work. Lifting machines, dump carts, people who step by step turned the flat surface into a monumental platform. And here it is important to feel the hidden dramaturgy. A man who started from zero now raises the earth for his residence, as if rewriting geography. This is not a gesture of wealth. This is a gesture of self-declaration. Kahn was a meticulous client. He monitored the blueprints, discussed materials, demanded harmony of proportions. His partner became the architect Delano, a man who seemed to understand Kahn's language without words. Together, they created a project that was not just big, it was designed to inspire respect. The house was to be beautiful, but not soft, majestic, but not theatrical. This was architecture of power, hidden under the guise of refinement. However, already at the moment when the project was only taking shape, a question arose that today seems inevitable. Was Khan not trying to compensate with the scale of the building for what seemed unattainable in society? Was not this hill, literally and metaphorically, a way to rise above those who did not accept him into their closed circles? Or on the contrary, was he building a space where beauty and order, his personal values, could finally manifest fully? The answer is still hidden. But one thing is already clear. The construction of Oheka Castle became the beginning of an architectural odyssey, in which every column, every balcony, every meter of man-made earth, part of the biography of a man who wanted to prove to the world that power can be expressed through symmetry and authority through proportion. And all this makes the next chapter even more intriguing. For the house that began as an ideal later became a legend, a myth. When the foundation finally stood in place and the man-made hill acquired its final outlines, before the eyes of the workers and architects for the first time emerged the true scale of the plan. Now it became obvious. Oheka Castle would not be just a house for the family. It would be something like a modern citadel, a fortress of culture, intellect, and symbolic power. It was then, in the silence of the construction site, where the smell of fresh earth and lime hung in the air, that the legend began to form, which would later be called the American Renaissance. The work progressed rapidly, but every detail required attention. Khan tolerated no compromises. He wanted everything, from the stone tracery to the angle of the staircases, to correspond to strict aesthetic principles that he considered almost mathematical. The project resembled not the construction of a private residence, but the unfolding of a gigantic chess combination, where every move was planned in advance. This revealed Khan's character. He was not a man of impulses, he was a man of structure. At that time, many of his acquaintances, banking house colleagues, and even members of the New York establishment wondered, why does a man who spends most of his life in business trips and negotiations need a house comparable in size to European palaces? The answer lies deeper than the desire to display wealth. Khan was not building for the external public. He was building for his own internal world order. His patronage activities, support for musicians, artists, theaters, had long distinguished him from other financiers of that time. But art itself was for him only part of a broader design. He saw in art and architecture ways to build a world where beauty shapes consciousness. The house for him was a kind of laboratory of ideals, a place where aesthetics and reason meet and begin to dictate their rules to the surrounding life. It was precisely for this reason that the central core of the future residence became not the living room, not the banquet hall, but the inner courtyard, the cloister, inspired by monastic silence and the strict symmetry of Italian palazzos. For some, this would seem a strange choice. Why in a billionaire's house a space reminiscent of a monastic gallery? But for Khan it was fundamental. He sought to create a place where order and peace would exist independently of the external world, a world noisy, chaotic, irregular. The cloister became the heart of the house, like an inner metronome setting the rhythm for the entire residence. The paradox is that the larger Oheka Castle grew, the more intense the conversations around it became. Newspapers mentioned it as the boldest private construction on the East Coast. Architectural critics speculated whether Khan was trying to revive Italian principles of the castle state on an American scale. Envious people grumbled as if he was trying to buy himself status. Friends, on the contrary, said that he was building for the first time a house that matches his inner world, strict, harmonious, and incredibly demanding. Interestingly, Khan himself did not comment on these rumors. He did not like to explain his decisions. He preferred the language of action. And so the house continued to grow, as if materializing the silent idea that he once formulated to his close ones. If beauty and order can exist somewhere, they must begin with the house where you live. But already then, even before the last tile would be laid, a new intrigue arose that no one voiced aloud. Could this house, so conceptual, so perfectly built, become a real home filled with human life and not a museum of thought? Or was it created from the very beginning as a monument and not as a dwelling? There is no answer yet. But the shadow of this question already falls on the scaffolding and the first gleam of marble, foreshadowing a story in which beauty and humanity do not always go hand in hand. When the outer walls of Oheka Castle began to rise above the horizon of Long Island, it became clear that the project had outgrown the framework of a private residence. The house was not yet completed, but it already lived its own life, changing the attitude of those around toward the very concept of wealth. Workers, architects, engineers, everyone who came to the construction site felt a strange combination of discipline and grandeur, as if they were participating not in construction, but in the creation of a new era. Khan appeared on the site almost daily. He could stand in silence for several minutes, studying the next fragment of the facade, and then unexpectedly point out a detail that no one else noticed. This line disrupts the breathing of the space, he would say, and demand to redo the element that seemed ideal to most. His perfectionism was so uncompromising that at times it seemed like eccentricity, but later many admitted it was precisely this rigidity that turned Oheka Castle into a masterpiece. The house grew horizontally and vertically at the same time. Staircases intertwined, the building's wings spread out to the sides like the branches of a giant tree, and the inner corridors began to form a complex system in which even experienced builders could get lost. And yet in this branching, logic was felt. Khan demanded that the space be subordinate to man, and not man to space. No random rooms, no compromise solutions. Every zone had to have a function and meaning. A special place was occupied by the rooms dedicated to art. The future music salon was designed as a sanctuary of sound, with high ceilings, perfect acoustic geometry, and windows that let in light as if it too were participating in the composition. Guests to whom Khan showed early blueprints recalled his phrase, "Music is the order of emotions. Architecture, the order of space. They must sound together." Meanwhile, the house was becoming a center of attraction, not only for specialists, but also for the general public. People from nearby towns came to the fence to at least catch a glimpse from afar of the banker's castle. Newspapers published articles with hints of megalomania. Some claimed that Khan was building an American counterpart to the Medici palaces, others that he was trying to cement his name in history through architecture, not finance. And although most of these interpretations were superficial, they contained an important note. People felt that this house was meant to outlive its creator. At the heart of this entire story lay a psychological knot. Khan still remained a man whose youth was marked by constant struggle for recognition. He knew that in some circles he would never be truly accepted. Neither wealth nor influence erased his foreignness and Jewish origin. But instead of trying to change people, he created a space where the rules belonged only to him. And here arises a new turn. The more the house acquired completion, the less it resembled a typical family residence. It developed a tonal strictness, almost imperial distance, which suited a museum or institute more than a home hearth. It seemed that Oheka Castle was intended not for living, but for demonstration, intellectual, symbolic, aesthetic. But was this a conscious choice of Khan or an unintended result of his character? He strove for beauty and order, but order too absolute inevitably suppresses life. And at the moment when the roof was almost laid, when the facades finally gleamed in the sunlight, the first shadow of a future paradox began to be felt in the air. Can a person live inside the ideal that he himself built? Or does the ideal, like any perfect form, inevitably repel everything living? The answer is still ahead, but it is too late to retreat. Oheka Castle is becoming a reality, majestic, precise, and dangerously flawless. The crisis entered the life of Oheka Castle not through a dramatic twist of fate, but through the economic tremor that gripped the country in the late 20s. When in October 1929 the stock market crashed, the world of Otto Hermann Kahn began to shift. His banking experience allowed him to understand the scale of what was happening, but even he could not stop the chain reaction. The external splendor of Oheka Castle, this grandiose fortress of his will, suddenly found itself surrounded by fragile financial reality. In these months, the house ceased to be a project of power and became a reminder of the price of ambition. Maintaining the huge estate required a staff of employees, daily expenses, and the constant presence of the owner. But Kahn was increasingly in New York, where he was engaged in saving projects, supporting public initiatives, advocating for cultural programs, trying to hold on to what seemed to be slipping away rapidly. The crisis became that very hook pivot which forced a change in goal. If previously Kahn strove to create a space capable of expressing beauty and order, now the theme of meaning arose before him. He participated more and more often in charitable meetings, supported artists, funded public projects. His public speeches shifted, less about business, more about values and cultural responsibility. However, physically he returned to Oheka Castle less and less. Here, in this house, there was no longer a sense of triumph, but a strange emptiness. The spacious halls created for music and social evenings stood silent. The honed geometry of the rooms, which once evoked admiration, now seemed superfluous, almost heavy. It seemed that the house, built as a symbol of overcoming, became a reminder that a person cannot control everything. After Kahn's death in March 1934, it was precisely this feeling that determined the further fate of the estate. His family could no longer maintain a residence of such scale. The house passed from hand to hand, turning now into a temporary school, now into a military facility, now into a nearly abandoned space. In each of these periods, what later historians would call the rebirth of legacy manifested itself. The house ceased to be a personal fortress and became a public burden, and then public potential. And in this transformation, a new perspective emerged on the second character of the entire story, on the house itself, Oheka Castle. Now it became an active player, reflecting the changes of the era. From a private dream, it transitioned to the search for a form of existence that would allow it to regain meaning. This crisis did not break the story. It made its continuation possible, but on different grounds. When at the end of the 20th century Oheka Castle found itself on the brink of disappearance, it became clear. The house outlived its creator, but did not outlive its own idea. The scale conceived by Kahn as an affirmation of order and beauty became too heavy for a time when private palaces could no longer be sustained by a single name. And here a new character emerged, not individual, but public. A group of historians, architects, and entrepreneurs saw in the ruins not a burden, but a chance to return to America a lost piece of cultural memory. The revival of the estate began modestly, studying the archives, restoring original plans, returning authentic details. Not for luxury, but for meaning. Thus, the house built as a personal manifesto transformed into an object of heritage, a space where history became more important than ambitions. Today, Oheka Castle lives differently. Concerts, film shoots, and public events take place here. The house no longer hides itself from society. On the contrary, it serves it. And in this lies the final turn. What was once a barrier between Kahn and the world became a bridge between the past and the present. This story resembles the plot of The Great Gatsby, but with a different resolution. Gatsby sought to be seen. Khan sought to build an ideal, and both confronted the fact that a person cannot eternally hold on to the space he created. But unlike the fictional hero, Oheka Castle received a second life, because it found a new purpose. The lesson here is simple and paradoxical. Greatness is not in building something larger than yourself, but in allowing that something to live after you. Where does the history of the house begin, which looks like a French chateau from the Renaissance era, but stands not in France, but on the rocky shore of the Atlantic in the state of Rhode Island? And why did the mansion, built for a sum equal to the annual budgets of small towns at the time, become a burden just a few decades later, from which the family decided to rid itself? None of the guests who once stepped into the grand hall of Ochre Court knew that its creator, Ogden Goelet, born not in a palace but in a simple, though prosperous, New York family of the mid-19th century, had conceived not just a summer home. He had conceived a statement, possibly the loudest one in his life. Contrast pursues this story from the first steps. The man who spent his entire career among the high numbers of financial reports and bustling deals on Manhattan dreamed of a house where every tower and every spire would speak not of money, but of culture, of status, of belonging to the European tradition, which in the United States of America at the end of the 19th century, they were only just learning to imitate. And no one knew that this dream would become too heavy for his heirs. When in the 88th year of the 19th century, Ogden invited architect Richard Morris Hunt, the most influential master of the era, to the project, it seemed impossible that the client intended to turn the coastal plot into a copy of a French chateau, and not a stylized one, but precise down to the last cornice. Hunt, a student of the Paris School of Fine Arts, saw in this a challenge and an opportunity. Thus began the story that connected two worlds, American new money and the dream of genuine European aristocracy. The character of the first act is Ogden Goelet, a reserved, far-sighted man, almost ascetic in everyday life, but incredibly ambitious in public steps, a financier who preferred to remain silent where others loudly proclaimed themselves. He believed in numbers and land, in real estate and city development, but one trait distinguished him from other representatives of the Gilded Age. He wanted to leave a mark not in the Stock Exchange Chronicle, but in Newport's architectural line, a mark that would be visible from the sea. And yet, what pushed him to such a grandiose construction? Here arises the first shadow of future tragedy. Goelet built the house not for himself alone, but for the family and for what he considered a legacy. And it is this legacy that half a century later will become impossible to preserve. But the viewer does not know this yet. He sees only the beginning. Blocks of Caen limestone arrive on the coast. The steel frame, hidden under the cladding, rises above the ocean. Local residents watch as the American billionaire makes the French Renaissance grow on the rocks of Newport. To understand why Ogden Goelet saw what other millionaires of his time did not notice, one must return to his roots. The Goelet family formed their fortune as early as the first half of the 19th century through real estate on Manhattan. These were not heirs of aristocracy, but practical investors whose wealth grew not from fashionability, but from calculation. They bought land when others were buying gold, and this philosophy, quiet, rational, almost emotionless, shaped Ogden's world from childhood. He saw how capital power is created, which is built not on shine, but on possession of space and time. But it was precisely this philosophy that gave rise to an internal conflict. In the era when American new money sought to prove their cultural sophistication to Europe, Goelet felt himself simultaneously both part of this wave and its critic. He was ambitious but not boastful, sought recognition but avoided scandals, invested millions, but himself led a life far from ostentation. His strategy for overcoming obstacles was always rational: preserve land, invest in the indestructible, choose stability where others rushed into risk. In 1886, When he began to think about a summer home in Newport, his influence in financial circles was already enormous. But Gilded saw the world differently than most entrepreneurs in his circle. For them, Newport was a stage. For him, a laboratory of cultural formation. And this became the first unexpected revelation. He was building not just a villa. He was building an architectural thesis that American wealth could possess the same aesthetic weight as European dynasties. The social conflict was obvious. Old New York families, those whose origins went back to the 18th century, looked at new money with cold condescension. Gilded belonged to those who caused anxiety and envy simultaneously. Their family's wealth was new, but dangerously growing, and this disrupted the usual social order. He knew that his family would not be accepted into the old elite solely due to capital. He needed a symbol, and this symbol was to be the house. And yet, Gilded himself was inwardly contradictory. In letters mentioned as testimonies of the era, he is characterized by contemporaries as a closed man, but surprisingly subtle in aesthetic matters. A calculating developer who could discuss the stone carving of French castles as detailedly as market quotations. He wanted to give cultural volume to his name, and at the same time, he himself remained a shadow, a man who rarely appeared in public, but created projects that sounded louder than himself. By the end of the 1880s of the 19th century, he makes a decision that will change not only his life, but the silhouette of the entire coastal Newport. He invites Richard Morris Hunt, the very architect who later built the breakers for the Vanderbilts. The choice of Hunt is not luxury, it is philosophy. Hunt was an American raised by Europe, a man who understood the language of the Loire castles not as stylization, but as a cultural system. And here two worldviews, the practical investors and the aesthetically educated architects, collided and merged. This union will bring Oheka Court to the world. Gilded sought not to demonstrate wealth, but to create cultural legitimacy. He saw in architecture a tool of social affirmation, and therefore his house would look older than the state itself in which it stood. When Hunt first ascended the coastal plot chosen by Gilded, the sea roared so loudly that words were lost before they could reach the interlocutor. The rocks, eroded by wind and salt water, seemed to resist any human intervention. But it was precisely in this harshness that Hunt saw what distinguished Gilded's project from all others. The house was to not adorn the land, but to argue with it. To be not just a fortress of luxury, but a monument of will. Their collaboration was never simple. Gilded interfered in details that other magnates would consider trifles. He demanded that the windows be oriented not only for the best view, but under that angle which would ensure the play of light, reminiscent of the French chateaux he studied in albums. He asked to increase the height of certain halls by several inches for the breadth of space. At first glance, this could be capriciousness, but Hunt quickly enough understood. The client does not act impulsively. He pursues an image that exists only in his head, a multi-layered image composed of memories, ambitions, and possibly a sense of incomplete belonging to that world to which he aspired. The construction of Oheka Court became a theater of tensions. Engineers argued with artists, stonemasons with decorators. Gilded, contrary to his introverted nature, personally walked around the construction site. He walked on the wet concrete in heavy coats, made notes in his notebook, stopped, raising his head to the future towers as if verifying them against an internal standard. He never raised his voice, but his silence, his barely noticeable gestures were stronger than the loud instructions of other clients. It was then that the workers began telling each other stories about how this house was intended not for luxury, but for eternity. That perhaps Gilded was building a mausoleum for his own family name, a castle that should outlive more than one owner and become something like an American dynastic citadel. Of course, these were fabrications. But in these fabrications, truth was felt. Oheka Court was indeed conceived as something more than a house. When by the end of the 1880s the construction entered its decisive phase, Gilded was going through a difficult period. His health was deteriorating, he tired faster than usual. But no one, not even his close ones, suspected that he would not see his house in its final glory. He saw the blueprints, saw the rising walls, saw the first finished interiors, but did not see the ceremonial completion. And this became a tragic turn, an invisible crack in the foundation that he had so carefully erected. After his death, the house passed to the heirs. And here the conflict is revealed, which seemed to have been inscribed in the mansion's fate in advance. He who dreamed of eternity left no heirs ready to wage the same struggle. The family respected his memory, but did not share his passions. For them, Oheka Court was huge, expensive, demanding, too demanding. And yet the house stood. It towered over the ocean like a giant born from one man's ambition. And it was precisely at this moment that the next character steps onto the stage, the world changing faster than anyone could expect. The 20th century was already knocking at the gates, and with it came changes that would overturn the fate of Oheka Court as radically as the waves overturned the stones at its base. By the beginning of the new century, Oheka Court was no longer just a house. It had become a landscape, a separate reality that the Gilded family maintained more out of duty than out of love. The towers shone on sunny days like polished amber, but inside there was a silence thick as dust on the balustrades. The house, conceived as a symbol of eternity, proved too large for living people. It demanded attention, strength, money, and most importantly, that very obsession which Ogden had, but which was not passed on to his heirs. As the country entered an era of rapid changes, Newport was losing its former role. The theatrical luxury of the Gilded Age seemed outdated, almost naive. Owners of neighboring mansions left for Europe, sold plots, curtailed seasonal balls. The world was becoming modern, pragmatic, noisy, and houses like Oheka Court seemed like relics of a civilization built on dreams that no one wanted to sustain anymore. And the Gilded heirs gradually realized, fighting this world is pointless. They maintained the house out of respect for their father's memory, but beneath this respect lived fatigue. Every winter brought new cracks in the walls, every summer, bills that grew faster than they could explain. The house required restorations, specialists, stonemasons, who were becoming fewer and fewer. It lived its own life, and the family, its own, and these two lives were diverging further and further. By the 30s of the 20th century, it became clear. Oheka Court, an expensive miracle that had lost its purpose. It was then that the thought arose, which no one would have dared to utter in Ogden's presence. The house must find a new owner. Not just a buyer, but one who could breathe meaning into it. And it was precisely at this moment that Salve Regina College stepped onto the stage, a small Catholic educational institution seeking a place for expansion. The decision was heavy, almost tormenting. Selling the house meant admitting Ogden's dream was too great for the family, but perhaps not too great for the world. By transferring Oheka Court to the college, the heirs seemed to return to the house its right to a future. The house ceased to be a monument to private ambition and became part of living culture, the very one Ogden had so aspired to touch. And in this lay the paradox. Only by losing the house did the family save it. When the doors of Oheka Court first opened for students and faculty of Salve Regina College, the house seemed to sigh after long stupor. Corridors, along which for decades only servants and rare family guests had walked, filled with a different sound. Footsteps, voices, laughter, the rustle of books. The Atlantic wind, always penetrating through the cracks of old frames, for the first time did not seem alien. It mingled with life rather than stifling it. The transformation was neither quick nor easy. The college received not just a majestic building in inheritance, but a titanic responsibility. Every tower, every arch, every capricious detail of French carving demanded care. And yet the new owner had what the Guillets lacked, not personal attachment, but a common goal. For the educational institution, the house became not a whim, but a mission. Within these walls, people were now to learn, think, grow, argue, all that creates the culture of which Ogden dreamed. Halls where balls were once held turned into classrooms. The spacious library, conceived by Gilded as a place of contemplation, filled with work tables. Even the grand staircase, a symbol of aristocratic pomp, became simply part of the student's route between classes. But this was the new beauty. Oheka Court ceased to be a decoration. It became a space where the past and future could exist without struggle. When the college began restoration, specialists discovered numerous hidden defects. Salt penetrated the stone, wood in some floor beams was eaten away by time, the roof required major renewal. The old house seemed to show the scars of its century-long existence. But for the first time in a long while, these scars did not frighten. They were a task, and tasks can be solved. Professors of architectural history led students through the halls, telling about Hunt, about French influence, about the strange ambition of the American Renaissance. Musicians rehearsed under the high vaults, and the sound reflected off the stone walls so purely that it seemed the house itself was listening. Late lights lit up in the windows, and Oheka Court, which under the Guillets had frozen in museum silence, finally lived its evenings not in solitude, but in motion. Gradually, the mansion turned into a symbol, not of wealth, but of resilience. It proved that architecture can live not only thanks to capitals, but thanks to people who find meaning in it. And although the Gilded heirs had long left Newport, the memory of his dream continued to resonate in lectures, in student footsteps, in the ritual echo of old corridors. Thus, the house created as a private fortress became a home for all. But any new life, even the most inspiring, soon faces a test. For Oheka Court, such a test became the years of rapid growth of Salve Regina College. By the mid-60s, the administration understood the beautiful but capricious mansion could not cope with the influx of students. It was created for a family of several people and their servants, not for hundreds of young people who daily opened and closed heavy doors, walked on marble staircases, used the heating system barely designed for previous loads. The house was tiring. This was a new, almost philosophical crisis. The college could not abandon Oheka Court. It was the heart of the campus, its symbol, its history. But leaving everything as is was also impossible. Time demanded practicality. It was precisely this dilemma that became the moment of internal turning point. The mansion was no longer considered as a museum of architecture. It was becoming part of the educational machine, where every square meter had to work. Then began a large-scale rethinking of the building's role. The administration decided only what is used can be preserved. And Oheka Court, contrary to its aristocratic nature, began to adapt. Basements were reinforced, old utilities replaced, some halls repurposed for the needs of faculties. But at the same time, every restoration was accompanied by architectural historians. It was impossible to allow practicality to destroy the essence. This era became the moment of true transition. If for Ogden Gilded the mansion was a demonstration of American wealth, then for the college it was turning into a tool for transmitting knowledge. And in this transition, a new truth was revealed. Greatness can be preserved not through luxury but through meaning. The house, which once cost the family a fortune, acquired value of a different order, not financial, but cultural. Interestingly, it was precisely in these years that many began to look anew at Gilded's own history. Professors explained to students the fact that the family could not hold on to Oheka Court was not a defeat. It was a reflection of the era when private fortunes could no longer compete with society's needs. And therefore, Douglas Gurley's decision to donate the house now seemed not a gesture of despair, but a gesture of foresight. Thus, the mansion survived its main crisis, acquiring new meaning. It became that rare example when architecture does not die after losing its owner, but, on the contrary, flourishes when falling into the hands of those who see in it not a memory of luxury, but the foundation of the future. When you enter Oheka Court early in the morning, still before the campus wakes up, the house seems almost unreal. Through the high stained glass windows, cold Atlantic light falls on the marble floor, and in this shaky silence, it is hard to believe that the building once served not a public purpose, but a personal affirmation of wealth. Now student footsteps, echoes of lectures, and the rustle of pages have replaced the silks of the Gaulet's guests. And yet the house did not lose its dignity. It seemed to have reconciled with its new role, but did not lose the grandeur that Richard Morris Hunt bestowed upon it. This metamorphosis is the most unexpected conclusion to the entire story. The mansion, created as a demonstrative symbol of private power, became the bearer of a completely different idea. Today, it embodies a legacy that lives not through ownership, but through transmission. Here they hold ceremonies for the opening of the academic year. Here thesis defenses take place. Here, under ceilings covered with French motifs, students make their first scientific discoveries. Many of them do not even know about the Gaulets, but the house becomes part of their biography, quiet but noticeable. And this recognition is perhaps greater than any balls and receptions of which Newport was proud a century ago. If one looks back at the path of Oheka Court, it reveals an almost literary structure. Like in the story of Gatsby, where the luxurious house turned out to be built for a dream, not for life, so in the fate of the Gaulets a symbolic rhythm appears. Ogden Gaulet created an architectural manifesto of the era of American fortunes, but the dream of immutable greatness collided with harsh reality. The house turned out to be larger than the families that built it. However, unlike the fictional Gatsby, here the story does not end in emptiness. The house did not sink to the bottom of time. It did not fade into oblivion. It changed its meaning. And it is precisely in the change of meaning, the main lesson of the story. Ambitions pass, private fortunes dissolve. Dynasties are forgotten. But architecture, art, and education outlive all this if they fall into the hands of those who see in them a resource, not luxury. When Douglas Gaulet transferred Oheka Court to the college in the 39th year, this step seemed forced. But today it reads as foresight, a rare example of how private legacy can become public property without losing its beauty. It is interesting to observe how two times coexist in the house. In the Grand Hall, where French music once sounded, student concerts now take place. On the grand staircase, down which ladies in velvet dresses once descended, someone now hurries to an exam. In the library, conceived by Gaulet as a place for reflection, students search for books for research papers. And the house accepts all this without resistance. It seems to understand that the new life does not destroy it. It prolongs its breath. But the most amazing thing is how Oheka Court ceased to be a symbol of elitism and became a symbol of resilience. It survived the era of industrial capitals, survived economic crises, survived the change of generations and educational models. It became proof that legacy does not have to be fragile. It is fragile only when tied to one person. But when transferred to society, it becomes stronger. Historians have not left direct evidence that Ogden himself dreamed of such an ending. His letters and documents do not contain prophetic phrases about the house's future. But the fact remains, his creation turned out to be part of something much larger than a dynasty. The house, which the family could not hold on to for themselves, society preserved for the future. Its walls now serve not the ambitions of one generation, but the path of many. And in this, perhaps, the most mature form of victory is manifested. A victory not over people and not over circumstances, but over time. Perhaps Oheka Court was not a forgotten French chateau that American millionaires could not afford for themselves. Rather, it was a grandeur that needed to find the right meaning. And it found it.